Hey guys, it's Olivia here from Olivia's Catastrophe, and today I'm here to talk to you all about my year abroad. So recently I returned home from my year study abroad in Australia, and I just wanted to talk about my experience and answer some questions. So before I get started answering the questions, I'm just going to tell you the situation and a little bit about what I did. So I went to Australia and I study English literature and creative writing, so I was there to take some English literature and creative writing classes there. I went to Melbourne, Australia, Monash University, so that's where I was throughout the months of study. However, as I didn't take any exams, I finished earlier than a lot of people, so I was done by the beginning of November. When I finished in November, I went on a 40-day road trip around Australia and New Zealand with one of my good friends that I made there. We were travelling for 40 days and then that ended around the 1st of January. I then had a job au pairing for an Australian family in a smaller town, and I was there for 1.5 months, and while I was with them I also got to go to Alice Springs with them on a work trip, which was a lot of fun as well as a lot of work. And then after au pairing I returned to start my second semester at university. However, we only had 1 week of classes before the virus struck and I took an emergency flight home back to the Netherlands, which is where I am right now. So while my year abroad was cut short, I did manage to do quite a bit throughout the time that I was there, and I had a lot of fun and really enjoyed myself. If you get the chance to do a semester or a year abroad, I definitely recommend you take it, because you're going to have such a great experience meeting new people, going to new places, and just seeing what it's like to live somewhere that isn't your home country. It was the first time that I was in charge of running my very own backpacking trip. I'd never been backpacking before. I'd never had only one hiking backpack and one little suitcase for about 2 months away from where I was supposed to be living, because directly after doing the road trip I went au pairing and then I went back to uni. So I had my backpack and my suitcase that was like a 7 kilo kind of suitcase. That's all I had for clothes and books and everything. It was such a groundbreaking experience, but we also did so many things that absolutely blew my mind and just shaped the way that I saw Australia and New Zealand, and it was definitely an experience and I wouldn't change it for the world. It was also interesting getting into Australian culture because it was such a weird mesh of what I knew and what I didn't know. I chose to go to an English speaking country as I'm doing English literature, and that meant that I was getting the same language and some of the traits of English culture, but then it was also very Americanized because you see a lot of Americans' influence in Australians' history, and then it was something that was entirely its own because you have the indigenous communities, and of course Australia has its own politics and it's developed in its own ways. So it was just a melding of all these different things that I knew and didn't know, and it was just interesting to discover and see in the people around me, but also in how everyday life was run. It was also a new experience to me being a study abroad student rather than a domestic student. While I do go to university in the UK, which is like a halfway home for me because I live in the Netherlands but I also live in the UK, kind of, it's a bit confusing, but as a domestic student I have all my kitchen equipment. I can afford to move as much of my stuff as I want in with me. However, when I went to Australia I had one 40-kilogram suitcase, one 7-kilogram suitcase and a backpack, which meant I had very limited stuff that I could bring with me, and I chose to only bring clothes and a couple of books, which meant I had to get used to not having my full extent of kitchen equipment. I had to change up my diet a little bit to match the limited equipment that I had, and it was just a new experience kind of living a bit of a minimalist life to some extent. I chose to live on campus, and I feel like this is the best thing for me when it comes to going to classes, because if I know that class is only a little bit of a walk away, 20 minutes, 10 minutes, then I know that I'm more likely to go to class and not just skip out on it. Not because I don't enjoy my classes, I really do, but sometimes I get a bit nervous with what you're expected to do, how much you're expected to talk, and as an introvert it can be a lot of pressure, so I like living within a walking range of school. However, Australia is a very big place, and one of the things that I learned while I was there is that distance is measured entirely differently. So while I thought a 1.5 hour train journey plus a bus ride to get to city centre is a long journey, Australians were like, nah, it's not that long. So If you want to live more of the city life, I guess you want to live off campus and more towards the city. However, it was just very expensive, and as I arrived and needed to move in straight away on that day, and I didn't have any friends that I could live with meanwhile while I found a place, it meant I couldn't really sign a contract while being halfway across the world and knowing I wasn't getting scammed or something like that. There were other things that were a huge adjustment to me, and that was having to rely entirely on friends. I am a very family person. You'll have noticed that if you follow me on Instagram or if you've gotten to know me. I'm really into my family. Like, I love them so much. So being away from them for such a long time was definitely a trying aspect of my year abroad. I wouldn't have it any other way because I feel like it was good for me, not because I needed independence, because while I love them a lot, I'm still already quite an independent person and I live away from them when I go to university in the UK anyway. But that distance of being so far was definitely something to contend with, and I had to get used to talking to my friends more, opening up to my friends more, letting them take care of me when I need it, and that was definitely a new experience for me as well. Then I just want to talk about what to pack and what not to pack, and this is what I'm going to say. Just pack clothes, that's all you need. And if you're a bookworm doing a year abroad, you don't need to pack too many books. Just don't do it. Don't make the same mistakes I did. I brought too many books because I also gained books while I was there. So I didn't need to bring books. If you're going to an English speaking country or a country where you can speak the language, try and find a library if libraries are a thing that that country does. I know some put more emphasis on having libraries around than others, but if you can deal with a library and find a library, then go for it. If you can't, then maybe bring a Kindle or an e-reader of some sort. You can even get the Kindle app on your phone these days, so you don't necessarily need to bring 10 books, Olivia. And last but not least, take your fears and shove them away. They are not important when you're on your trip. Take every chance that you can to do everything that you possibly can. I have two major fears and one that I don't really mention that much. My first one is my fear of heights, but while I was in New Zealand, I went skydiving and I totally conquered that fear of heights. While it will never be gone, while thinking of heights will always give me a certain sense of anxiety, and being all the way up that high definitely had me questioning my life choices, and I will always physically react to me being in a very high altitude. It was still amazing that I could do this, and my family and everyone was shocked because, yeah, my fear of heights is very strong. But even stronger than my fear of heights is my arachnophobia. In fact, lots of my friends laughed when I told them that I was going to Australia for my year abroad, because I am the most afraid of spiders that there can be, to the extent where I have had panic attacks because spiders have been within my vicinity. It's a problem. And I went to Australia and I stayed in a small town and I dealt with some big spiders. Not entirely alone, but that is beside the point. Don't let the fear that you have of anything hold you back from the chances that you get, because you will regret it and you will be opening yourself up to so much experience and growth by facing and conquering those fears. My other fear was something happening to a family member while I was far away abroad. There's nothing really you can do to control that. So let's get down to the Q&A section. I'm just going to say first names of people who ask questions, and I've got my phone here, so I'll just be reading the questions off and answering them best I can. So Carol asked unexpected hardships, and I feel like the most unexpected hardship that I should have expected was the distances, and how having a driver's license can really make a big difference when you're in Australia, because you need a car to travel to those hiking places, to the bases of where you want to start. You need a car if you want to do a road trip. I'll tell you how we did our road trip otherwise, but having a car in Australia and being able to drive is definitely something that I would recommend if you can do it, because it will just save you a lot of money. Public transport is slow, the buses were not always reliable. Definitely best to be able to drive, and I didn't expect that to be such a hardship, because in the Netherlands you just cycle everywhere, and in London public transport is on point. I doubled up some of your questions when you asked similar things. So Carol and Gaia both asked, how did you deal with being away from your family for so long? Was it hard to be away from them? Yes, of course it was very hard to be away from them. The hardest point for me was Christmas and when I watched Star Wars. So Christmas is just a really big deal in my family. We are a Christian family, and it's one of the few celebrations that we properly go all out for and celebrate with a lot of family traditions and such. And this year for Christmas, all 5 of them were together, and of course I was not there. But I did have a very good time with my friend in New Zealand on Christmas Day. It did hit me that all of my family were together and I was feeling a bit like I was missing out. And the other time was when I watched Star Wars, because traditionally on Christmas Day or Boxing Day we go and watch the new Star Wars. We all grew up with Star Wars due to my dad's fandom obsession, and it's kind of become something we love too. So I had to go and see Star Wars by myself, because while I was au pairing, all of my friends were back home and I was not. And yeah, there was no one to watch it with me who was interested in Star Wars, so I went and watched it in a very fancy cinema by myself. And as the credits rolled up, I turned to start talking to my family about it automatically, and they weren't there. That was a sad day, but yes, it was definitely difficult to be away from my family. And how did I cope? I did have regular video calls. I called my grandparents about once a week steadily. I called my 2 older sisters about once a week, and don't really video call with my dad because that's not our thing, but we do text. And I did have a call from my mum in the beginning once every 2 days, and then once every 3 days-ish, because as a mother she likes to check in, especially as I'm so far away. And with my younger sister, who is basically my best friend, who you've met in my Meet My Sister video, it was really difficult to be away from her. When we had video calls and she would cry because she missed me, it really was difficult, but we set up a way to have a connection together, and that was our film nights. Film nights are just something we do a lot because my younger sister loves film, and I like watching films but I don't like watching them alone. So when I'm back home, we always have a big list that I need to catch up on. So what we would do is she would stay up late at night and I would wake up early in the morning, because there is quite a big time difference between Australia and Europe, and we would both count down and start the film at the same time. Then every 20 minutes we would have a little call to discuss what we were watching, to talk a little bit, and then we'd continue watching the next 20 minutes, and it was almost like I was right there with her watching a film. And those are some memories I'm never going to forget of spending time with my family, even when I'm not with them. Gaia asked me, do you make friends easily in a new location? I want to say no, because I feel like I don't, but I always end up making friends fairly quickly, so I guess yes. But that's because I end up having extrovert friends and they approach me and they're very happy to do a lot of the talking in a conversation until I open up as well. I feel like I can be friendly, I'm not unapproachable, but I feel like maybe internally I struggle more than I outwardly seem to struggle, but I did make friends pretty quickly, and for that I was very happy. Andrea and Hope both asked me Warwick quality of teaching versus Australian, and Warwick is the university I go to in the UK. While Warwick University focuses a lot for English literature on classic books, I feel like it does more of the classic side of things, Monash seemed to do more of the modern day topics, and Warwick kind of does the traditional literature, whereas Monash seems to be more open to casual things. For example, when I was at Warwick, I took crime fiction and I took Shakespeare for English literature, and then in Monash I took fairy tale, children's literature, and those are things that I couldn't take if I was in Warwick. So I was happy to expand in my literature, like broaden my horizons a bit when it came to literature. Then when it comes to creative writing, Warwick definitely gets my vote because they do it a lot better. There's a lot more options for the creative writing. You can study short story, you can study a video game narration, you can study so much screenwriting and all of that. Whereas Monash, I feel like, have been cutting their creative writing modules, so there's only poetry and short story that you can take. Took poetry last semester, currently taking short story online right now. But when it comes to the quality of teaching, I have to say it just was not up to par, because it was so easy. Warwick really pushes us, it's very difficult, it's so hard to reach those high grades, and they really want us to dig in deep, and I feel like I've always learnt more at Warwick than I learnt at Monash. Monash seemed to stay very surface level, and I'm not saying it as I hate on Monash or anything, because it was quite nice to have a bit of a lighter workload that I could do easier for my year abroad, which when I had time to travel and explore and make friends, but I feel like they could dig a lot deeper, and sometimes it even got a bit frustrating for me. However, for Monash, I have heard that other departments are better than the English literature department. For example, I have a friend who does law, and she also is from Warwick but doing a year abroad in Monash, and she said that she prefers how law is taught and handled in Monash better, so it might just be the English literature and creative writing department. Cass asked what was your favourite part of the trip, and my mum recently just asked me that, and she let me choose 4 things, so I'm just gonna say 4 things. The first one I have to say was when I got to do my first hiking and camping trip with some friends, and we hiked and camped around Wilson's Prom, which is absolutely beautiful. It was just so gorgeous. We also went during winter, which is an unpopular time to camp, which meant there was no one there. We had these beautiful, pristine beaches all to ourselves. We're exploring these beautiful forests all to ourselves, and it was all in one place. It was magical, even if it was such hard work because it was hiking up and down all day for 3 days. The second thing that I said was my favourite part of the trip was when I got to explore the Great Barrier Reef, because that was just something I never actually thought I would be able to do, and that was amazing. Thirdly, I mentioned skydiving. Again, that feeling of conquering your fear and being on top of the world was just fantastic. And then I also mentioned finding a church that I see as home. I have not really, since moving out of home, found a church where I've personally connected to on such a deep level and had such a good community to. And I guess that ties into how I dealt with being away from my family, because the church was like another family to me. If I needed anything or just needed any support, the church brethren were really there to help me and uplift me. They helped me with moving in. They helped me with giving me a place to store my stuff over summer for free. They helped me in those 2 days when I had to depart from Australia suddenly and didn't even get to say goodbye to all of them. The church was really there for me and they were fantastic. That's missing out so many other fun experiences I had, but I can't tell you about them all. Cass said, what's something you would change about your trip if you could? I would change the current situation so that I got to finish off my year. That's what I would change. Cass also asked, how did your budgeting go? I did take out my student finance loan that I don't usually take out so that I would be able to travel a bit more, and then I was very, very careful with my finances. I planned my meal schedule so that I wasn't buying unnecessary food, and while I did eat out more than usual because I was exploring all of the wonderful Asian cuisine that Australia has, with it being so much closer to Asia than Europe, that's very authentic, I also made sure I didn't spend too much money on eating food out. I went on my buying ban, which meant I wasn't spending any money on books while I was there, and all of that money could go towards travel. And when we did travel, we were so careful with our money. We didn't just spend it willy-nilly. We didn't eat out at all while we were on our 40 days travel. We cooked and prepared for ourselves and brought with us on trips, etc, etc. I think we did very well, and actually my money lasted all through Australia. Ayuni and Dom both asked me, what made you choose Australia? And this is quite a story because originally I chose Spain for my year abroad, and that's where I was very set on going. And then I mentioned that I was going on a year abroad to my librarian. I think I've mentioned my librarian before and what a close relationship we have. So I mentioned it to her and she was like, Spain? Why don't you go to Australia when you can take children's literature? And she talked about the Australian literature there, and she talked about the experiences she had there. She's from New Zealand. She also talked a bit about New Zealand, and single-handedly she managed to convert me from going to Spain, mastering my Spanish and living Spanish culture for longer, as I usually work there during the summer, and turn me on to Australia, which is where I decided to go at the last minute. Jade asked me, how did you get your au pair job? Again, another funny story. So before we left for our 40-day trip, I decided I wanted to have that job for the month of January and half of February to tie me over until summer was over while the rest of my friends went home. I decided that I found a job and it was pretty secure. It was a mother who was going back to work and she wanted support for her baby while she went back to work. However, towards the end of our 40-day trip, she decided that she was not going to be going to work anymore, which essentially meant I was out of a job and out of anywhere to live for January to February. I had about a week left to try and find a new job, which was a lot, and I wasn't having much success. I use aupairworld.com usually, and on then I found a family that was looking for a French au pair, however ticked a lot of my other boxes, and I just decided to apply even though I wasn't exactly what they were looking for. However, they read through my application, then they checked out Olivia's Catastrophe, which they told me about later, and as both of those parents work in creative fields, they thought it'd be great to have another creative live with them for a short period of time before they took on a long-term au pair who does speak French and can help with the French side of teaching their children. So just by chance they kind of decided I was the one that they wanted, and I absolutely adored my time there with that au pair family. They were so nice to me, they had great kids, and it was just, I think it was a good vibe for all of us all around. Jade also asked, what was your favourite mode of transportation? Trains, because actually I don't I didn't used to like taking trains in the UK or the Netherlands. It made me very uncomfortable and very anxious, but because I had to take it every time I wanted to go to the city in Australia or anytime I wanted to get anywhere, I got used to it and I got a lot calmer, and yeah, I really did enjoy taking trains. Jade asks, did you find yourself in any tricky travel situations? Australia is so hot all the time. We were backpacking with a suitcase and a backpack, but because Australia is often 40 degrees or above, it meant that the pavement is always burning hot and our suitcase wheels started to melt. My suitcase was a two-wheeler, and once one of those wheels were gone, it was a goner. You couldn't wheel it anymore. And my other friend had four wheels and one of them melted and she could just about push it on three wheels. But it meant that instead of having a backpack that weighs about 7 kilos and wheeling a suitcase, I was carrying a backpack that was 7 kilos and my suitcase in my hand, which was a lot. Maddie asks, do you have any travel advice or tips for inexperienced travellers? My main trip is to take every opportunity that you possibly can. If you're thinking about travelling within Australia, hopefully you're able to drive, because that will really make it easier for you and you could road trip it yourself rather than paying for a coach company. But the coach company was a really good one. If you can't drive, I recommend the Greyhound. You can get a pass which will allow you to hop on and hop off buses going whichever way and wherever they possibly can in Australia for 30 days or longer, depending on how much you want to pay. So we bought one that was for 30 days and then we could just take any of their coaches for 30 days, and that just took us everywhere. It was like a huge road trip, except we weren't the ones who were driving. Try and do it also for the environment, because that's another plus. Stay in hostels, not hotels. Hostels are really cheap. You can get a room just for you and your friends or just you and yourself. We mostly tried to find rooms where we could just be ourselves, but most often or not we had roommates. We were in all female ones, but I think we were in two where they were just like mixed. Everybody in hostels are really friendly. A lot of them have some really cool travel stories and we made some nice friends while we were doing that. I'd also recommend taking breaks, because when you're traveling for an extended period of time back to back, it can get overwhelming to go on a tour or go and explore something new every single day, and you don't have to feel guilty about being in a place that's new and different and exciting, but just having a day where you sit down, read a book and watch TV. I know that we took 2 days like that on our trip, and the first one we felt a bit guilty about it, but then towards the end of our trip where we were getting a bit travel weary, we were just perfectly okay to just watch a film all day long. Maddie asks, if you could travel anywhere, where would your next trip be? I did have some more trips planned for the Philippines, Singapore and Indonesia. However, in light of the virus, those 2 trips won't be happening, and I'm not sure Singapore's happening anymore either. So if I could take a trip next, it would definitely be to go there, because that's where I want to be. Maddie asks, what was the most challenging thing about studying overseas, and what was the best thing? The most challenging thing was definitely being so far away from my family, and the best thing was all the new experiences that I got to have. Jess says, please just explain to me all the places I need to visit and any top tips. So my top tip would be the Greyhound bus if you can't drive by yourself, and YHA hostels if you are travelling within Australia and New Zealand. Those hostels are so good. The rooms, depending on which hostel you get, whether it's more modernised or if it's one of their older ones, but either which way, their rooms are really, really good. I felt very safe at YHA hostels. The atmosphere was always good. You could do things in the community as a hostel, but they also had a lot of tours that they weren't hosting, but the tours paid attention to YHA and could pick you up from there. I would also try and go on as few tours as possible. If you can, like, hike by yourself and guide yourself, go for it. Go with friends and you'll be able to find your way, because all of the trails are very clear cut. People ask me where you should go, and I'm going to tell you the top places that I went, and one of them would be Wilson's Prom, which is in Melbourne. You can hike and camp and see amazing beaches there. I recommend 3 or more days, but you can definitely just go one day and go to one area of Wilson's Prom. I also recommend the Great Oceans Road. It's a beautiful beach kind of road trip that you can do with the 12 Apostles at the end, and it was just absolutely fantastic. We went all along the Great Ocean Road one day, camped, and then all the way back, stopping at different places on the way back. I also really recommend making your way to Sydney just to see the city and the Sydney Opera House. It's just kind of a rite of passage. I also really recommend doing an East Coast road trip. That's what we did, and we had a lot of fun. There are some beautiful beaches and islands. Beaches at Byron Bay were nice. I've heard that Magnetic Island has beautiful beaches, but we especially loved going to the Whitsunday Islands. The waters that are blue there are just so fantastic, and it blew my mind. I wouldn't really recommend going to Canberra. You don't necessarily need to. It may be the capital, but it feels a bit more residential and museum-y than anything fascinating. I also really liked Gold Coast because the contrast of a beach and the skyscrapers was just fantastic. The weather was A+, and it was just so lovely. Do be careful of the sun there. The sun is intense. It will burn you. You need sunscreen. You need to be reapplying it multiple times a day. And I'm just going to say, if you have a darker skin tone, you still need that sunscreen. It doesn't mean you're immune to skin cancer. I'd also really recommend going to Cairns. From there we went to the Great Barrier Reef, and you can get to a lot of good Great Barrier Reef locations from Cairns, and there's a beautiful rainforest as well, which unfortunately we didn't get to see, but definitely recommend. And Brisbane was one of those city places that was really nice. They've got like a street beach in the middle of their city, and it's just gorgeous at night. So recommend it. And then last but not least, Alice Springs, where Uluru Rock is. That rock is magnificent and will blow your mind. And Alice is actually quite a central place for Indigenous communities. There's quite a lot of Indigenous communities there, so you can probably learn and experience their community a lot by being there in the desert. If you are going there, please don't go in February, which is when I went. That is the peak of summer. It's the worst heat it can be. Try and go in autumn or spring. Yeah, that's when you should go. If you are on the side of the world where you're in Australia, where you get to Australia, do go visit New Zealand as well, because it's just so nearby. The flights are not too expensive, and if you're going to New Zealand, you need to be in Queenstown. I have never been somewhere with such magnificent mountains. I cannot even put it into words, and the photos don't do it justice at all. You need to be there yourself, and you need to go to Milford Sound because those waterfalls were just stunning, and the road trip there is the most beautiful road trip. Like Great Ocean Road, Milford Sound, what was the best road trip? I'll let you guys figure that out when you go yourselves. The last one is do make your way to Hobbiton. We were new nerds because we watched all the Hobbit films and as many of the Lord of the Rings films as we could before we went, just specifically because we were going, and even then I still loved Hobbiton so much, having just been newly introduced to the fandom. It was still such an experience, so definitely go. KJ asks, what are some things you noticed that were different from what you're used to during your time in Australia? Just how different people conceived distances. Distances were conceived in a way that was entirely new to me and I hadn't experienced before. The climate was definitely different. Hot, 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 hot. And I absolutely loved it because I live for the heat, but just be ready and drink a lot of water, guys. And then she also asked, did you see any cute wildlife? And yes, we did. I became such a fan of echidnas while we were there, and I had a friend who researched all of these facts about echidnas, which was just amazing. They were so cute. And we also saw, by chance, a mama koala with her baby koala in a tree. That was a magnificent experience and it was just so cute and beautiful. I have fed a kangaroo while I was there. We spent a lot of time just exploring the wildlife. Saw a snake while we were hiking. It was mad. Also, the wildlife I didn't care about were the spiders, but we saw them anyway. Dom asked what was the scariest part of travelling. So before we started travelling, it was when the fires started in Australia this summer, where it was very intense and the burnings were really, truly the most awful it's ever been. So when we started our trip, we first went to Sydney with a group of friends and then Canberra for a bit, and we hadn't planned the rest of our trip. Not because we didn't want to, but because we knew that we were going to have to change and alter our itinerary depending on which areas of Australia were burning, inaccessible, roads, etc, etc. So we couldn't plan out our trip beforehand, which essentially meant we had 40 days with nowhere to live, but we had to make it up as we went along. And while it was a lot of fun to do that because we got to have a bit more freedom in picking and choosing and being flexible, it was still so scary to embark on a trip where you just didn't know where you were going to get to quite yet, and that was a bit of the scariest aspect of travelling. Isabel from The Reader and the Chef asked, tell us about school, which I think I've done and covered in enough detail. And she also asked, did you try Vegemite? Yes, I did. No, I did not like it. It is quite reminiscent of the British Marmite, but it just was so sour and peculiar that it didn't work for me. But the au pair family who I looked after, they really liked it, so I just think it's an Australian thing. Hope asked me, are you done with school there? Was it just 1 semester abroad? No, it was 2 semesters abroad, but it did get cut short because of the virus. However, I'm still an Australian abroad student. I'm doing all my classes on Zoom during the night because of the time difference. Hope asked me if I will miss the sunshine, and I already do. I stepped off that plane and I was like, Europe is freezing, and I was so cold, and I've been wearing a dressing gown for the past few days because I cannot get used to this cold weather. Roz N1, I don't know how to pronounce their username, asks, what were some everyday routines, lifestyle, value differences that you noticed compared to where you're from? I want to say one of the things that I noticed was that Australian people are so kind, and that's coming from someone who lives in the Netherlands, where people are already so nice to you and are always willing to help you if you get knocked off your bike or whatever. I've always had people stop and ask if I'm alright, if I need help, but in Australia it just went to another level. I could be looking at Google Maps trying to find where I was trying to go to meet this tour guide or whatever, and a random person would stop on the street and be like, oh, where are you trying to get to? Can I help you? It's not even a case where I look like I'm distressed or too confused, but they can just see that I don't know where I'm going and they just want to help me. Many times when I was having heavy bags or something, there were people who were always willing to help. And just to showcase the chill nature, once we were at an airport, and you know when it says gate opens at this time, or like just wait for gate, instead of saying that, it just said chill, like chill. Your gate's not open yet, so you should just chill. And I just thought like that just shows Australian culture very well. Madison and Mariana both asked what was your favourite travel destination. Again, I've talked about that extensively, so I'll just pass over that one. And Madison asked, how did you manage to film sit-down videos while you were travelling? Essentially, I didn't too much. I mostly just vlogged all of my travel experiences, and I bulk filmed before I went on my trip because I knew I was going to be gone for a long time. When we were in New Zealand, which was when it was the end of the year, so all of those best and worst videos were coming out, we did rent ourselves an Airbnb to treat us to the fact that we've been living in hostels for the past 3-4 weeks, and that we wanted to be able to celebrate Christmas and New Year's like properly, cook properly, etc, etc. So we did have an Airbnb, and I was able to film those sit down videos early in the morning before my travel buddy woke up. However, while we were staying in hostels, I did not manage to film any sit-down videos. It was all pre-filmed. Isabel Alquaz asked, any Aussie reads you tried out and would recommend? So I decided to split my reading experience by doing poetry for the first semester and then novels for the second semester, which means that I didn't actually get a chance to get round to reading too many Australian novels, so I don't really have too many to recommend. But for non-fiction, I recommend No Friend But the Mountain by Beirut Spruchani and Eggshell Skull by Bree Lee. Bree Lee focuses on the law system and how it treats sexual assault cases in Australia, and Beirut Spruchani talks about his experiences in a detainment prison while he was trying to immigrate into Australia. And then for poetry, I definitely recommend Omar Sakar, who is an Arab Australian poet, and he talks a lot about being of two worlds while living in Australia. And then we have John Kinsella, who is a very well known Australian poet. He truly engages with the Australian environment in his poems, and I really appreciated seeing that in his collection Insomnia, which is the one I definitely recommend. Ladybug asked, did you get to see some authors? And unfortunately I did not. I was not really focusing on trying to visit authors. Oh, actually I did! That's a lie. For my university course, there was an opportunity to go and meet Zadie Smith, and I did. I met Zadie Smith. I still haven't read one of her books though, but we did enjoy listening to her talk about social media and literature and her own books. And then afterwards we were a bit sneaky, and while she was leaving we just asked if we could talk to her for a second, and that was really great. But otherwise I wasn't really looking to meet up with many authors. Instead I wanted to spend my time meeting some of my booktube, book blog and other bookish content sites friends who I wouldn't be able to meet if I wasn't in Australia. So I got to meet Nicole and her books, I got to meet Shoy from the Starlit Reader, I got to meet Aditi, who is now on Bookstagram, and some others, which was just so fantastic. Last thing that Isabel Aquaz that asked, that I'm just going to end the video on here, is there something related to your time there that you would like to talk about? And one of the things that I want to talk about is black culture in Australia. So when I went to Australia, I really struggled to find a black community. I didn't know where they were at. I didn't see many black people around. In Melbourne, while I was in Cairns, I saw a lot more Indigenous people, and while I was in Alice Springs, I saw a lot more Indigenous people, but not many Caribbean, African-esque black people, and I wondered, where are they? They must be there somewhere. And it was also high time I found them because I needed to get my hair plaited and I didn't know where to go. Eventually a cleaner came to our building and she had her hair plaited really well, and I asked her, where did you get your hair done? And she led me to an Ethiopian woman who was absolutely lovely to me during my duration in Australia and did my hair every time since I met her. And then we found this nightclub which was called Laundry, and they played R&B and hip hop, and there were the floods of black people. And it was just so interesting to see a lack of black people and to experience some racism for the first time, because, well, not for the first time, but I never like personally struggled with racism because I always had my family with me when it happened. I received a lot of comments. I had a lot of people who would just grab my hair or touch my hair without asking me. And the worst case was when I was in Hungry Jack's with my friend. Somebody was eating a greasy burger and like the mess was on their hands and they were sitting next to me, and while I was talking to my friend they grabbed my hair and said, "Oh, that's so pretty," with all the food gunk on their fingers. And I was a bit overwhelmed, and I kind of just was, I didn't clap back like I should have, but that's something I needed to work on, and I have learned a lot better since Australia. There was another time when we went to a bar to get some drinks and I was with one other black friend. We were a group of us, but there was me and one other black woman with me, and they had to check our passports. So they checked my passport, which is a purple British passport, right? A purple British passport which has my name and age on it. And then they checked my friend's passport, and she had a different passport, and it was bright green, which is very different to my purple, and it had her name on it, which is very different to mine. And then the person handed the passport back and had the audacity to say, "Oh, so you're sisters?" She just checked our passports that are different colours, with different nationality, with different names, and still asked us that question, and then looked offended when we questioned her or about it or something like that. And it's just some other comments that were made. I travelled with my friend Marilyn, and whenever she said that she was from France or whenever I said that I was from England, a lot of people decided to question where we were from, saying you don't look English or you don't look French. None of their business. If you ask us where we're from and we tell you, that's the answer. My friends also had some other comments, especially my non-binary friend also got some comments. So I could just continue going on, but I do think Australia has a long way to go in being inclusive of minorities and not having those comments and those mindsets in their mind, and just developing and getting further in that regard. So I think that's something I would like to point out, especially if you're traveling there as a minority. Be aware that you might be getting some of these comments, that you might be getting some of these looks, that some of these things might happen, and you're going to have to grow a double skin. You're going to have to be able to question it, to express when you don't like something, because I guess that's one way I grew while I was there. I've learned to not take it anymore, but at the same extent, it's just not fun. Nobody likes to experience those emotions. I feel like that's a pretty negative note to end on, so I just want to say Australia was really one of the best experiences I've had in my life so far, and I just really recommend you going on a study abroad trip if you can. This video is quite long, so I want to end it here. Please let me know in the comment section down below, did I answer your question? If you've got any more questions, let me know, and let me know if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? This video, thumbs up if you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more, and don't you forget to hit that notification bell to be updated every time I have a new video. And you know what they say, onwards and upwards. Excelsior!